Hi, Jonathan York from Bay Financial Partners, looking at the investment markets. Certainly looks like it could be a pretty interesting close now to the financial year here. A little bit of divergence out there in the markets with a couple of the big investment banks coming out and expecting a rate hike in the US now in September. Common perception is still that that's probably on hold with the Fed, but certainly the US economy is pushing on at a pretty reasonable rate. Most people now expect a further rate increase from the US before year end. Obviously, that has some pretty major implications out there for the rest of the world, and it's just going to be interesting to see how that sort of goes into the mix, especially with the US presidential elections, which certainly the polls seem to have narrowed up quite a bit now, and in some of the swing states, Donald Trump is actually ahead in some of those, which could be pretty interesting if Trump was actually the winner of the presidential election in November. Be interesting to see the market reaction. Most people expect if there was a Trump victory, the knee-jerk reaction will be down, but then it'll be interesting to see how it sort of pans out over the course of the presidency, because historically the Republican Party has been a pretty good spender on infrastructure, etc., and that should be good for the US economy. Also as well, obviously coming up towards sort of quarter end, and then sort of 3 months later we've got year end. It's going to be interesting to see how these funds sort of position themselves. Certainly at the moment the markets are trading reasonably well. There's a reasonable bid out there. Certainly earnings are okay. US corporate balance sheets are in pretty good shape as well. And it's just going to be interesting now to see, if you do get an increase from the Fed, and most people expect one before year end, see how that sort of impacts on markets. Locally here in New Zealand, again, a little bit of change in perception out there. Reserve Bank will be keeping rates on hold in September now. Potentially there's a cut coming in November, but again, that will probably be the low now, whereas, sort of 3 or 4 weeks ago, people were talking about an OCR of possibly 1.5. But certainly the New Zealand economy, again, is sort of pushing on a pretty good rate. GDP is sort of 3% plus. We see a little bit of an increase in the sort of payouts for the dairy sector as well, and that's all good news for the New Zealand economy, and that's starting to give a little bit of feel-good factor out there in the New Zealand economy. Added to that, obviously, you've still got a reasonably rampant housing market, although potentially there are some signs that the recent changes in regulations and requirements have sort of cooled the housing market a little bit. But again, it's pushing on a pretty good rate. Sort of classic case of supply and demand. At present, there is more demand than supply. Couple of interesting issues as well with some of the big sort of names here in New Zealand. Port of Tauranga got a share split coming up. That's going to take their shares from around $20 down to around $4. It's just going to be interesting again to see sort of investors' appetite. Potentially, I think you'll see quite a few more investors looking at Port of Tauranga as an investment option, given the shares are now priced at $4 as opposed to the current price of $20. Also got a bit of a demerger with Trustpower as well. And again, it'll be interesting to see how that sort of pans out. Again, potentially with the share price sort of falling a little bit as they sort of split up the companies and give sort of shares to both sides. Potentially, you could just see a little bit more investor appetite coming through on those shares. As always here in New Zealand, investors looking for income. Certainly term deposits and bond rates are pretty low at present, but as discussed here many times, there are plenty of options out there, and if you're interested in looking at the investment options, call us on 0800 867 323 or go to the website www.bayfinancialpartners.co.nz for lots of interesting articles, and we look forward to speaking to you soon.